Okay, so today I've been following your Journalism Week online for the last day and a half, and clearly you're getting some really interesting stuff, and some of the debate that's happening is great, and I guess there's no better evidence of the way that media is changing than the fact that I pretty much know exactly what has been said over the last day and a half, whereas normally I'll be coming into this completely blind. In fact, to the point where I wasn't 100% sure what Debbie had been speaking about before me. And I thought, oh crikey, I better not be going in saying exactly the same stuff. But of course, these days, I just have to go on my phone, check Twitter, scroll down. I know she's done campaigns and she's obviously done a very good job of it. So I'm not going to go too hard on campaigns today. What I thought would be interesting for the next half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end of it, is really talk a little bit about the reality of what it's like to be a reporter at the moment. Because the bottom line is that for the majority of you, that's the job that you're aspiring to get. And you've had quite a lot of big picture stuff in terms of, is print dead, is it not, the rise of digital, the decline of print, whatever it may be. And I think that's very important, and we'll touch on that as we go along. But I think the best thing I could probably do in terms of the speakers that you got this week is to give you a bit of an insight as to what the job's actually going to be like when you get that job, and how you're going to get the job in the first place, what people like me are looking for when it comes to interviews and when it comes to recruiting the right person for my newsroom. So Susan's already said a little bit about me. So my background is as a reporter, initially in London, where I was down there for 3 years on a local weekly. I then came up north to work as a sub-editor at Harrogate Advertiser, and then at the Yorkshire Evening Post. And then I went on to be deputy editor at Wakefield, getting the editor's job. And I've still got hands-on control at Wakefield, but I'm also responsible for a lot of other titles across West Yorkshire. So, well, I might not be quite as glamorous as Jeff Stelling. I do know pretty much what I'm talking about in terms of West Yorkshire local journalism. I think, yeah, I do. Okay, let's kick off with the nuts and bolts of being a reporter in 2013, because you know I do come to Trinity occasionally, and I do speak to some of the classes, and I find that each year that I come, I do have to change what I'm talking about quite considerably, and that is really the rate of progress that's taking place in the industry. And I think change is probably a really important place to start, because when you go into whichever newsroom you do go into, whichever line of journalism you go into, whether that's print or magazine or sport or news, get ready for change from day one, because the industry is evolving very, very rapidly and certainly hasn't stopped yet. And I think in terms of the evolution side of things, it's something I say quite a lot. There's comparatives if you look back in history in terms of what newspapers are doing at the moment. So when TV first came about, before my time when it was invented, but when it first came about, everybody said radio was dead. Why would you want to listen to radio when you can see the pictures in front of you and hear them as well? Well, you look at radio now, various changes that radio have gone through, and radio's probably never been listened to as much as it is now. When video came about, everybody said, well, no need to go to the cinema now, is there really? Because we can watch the films at home. There's no issue there. And remember cinemas in those days, back in the days that I was growing up in the mid-80s, you know, there were crumbling relic-type old buildings in town centres and city centres, which had, you know, the decor of something out of Victorian England, and, you know, your shoes would stick to the carpet, whatever it may be. It wasn't really a nice place to go to, not really a family destination. Cinema rebranded, they knew they had to, and now all of a sudden, it's a family destination, it's a day out. Again, it's never been as popular as it is now. So newspapers and the internet, we're in a similar place, really. I think that a lot of people are saying, or have been saying, well, why do you need newspapers anymore? You can go online, get the information you need. You don't need to pay for that. So what's the point of newspapers? Why is anybody going to buy a newspaper again? And I think if the newspaper model stays the same, or the industry doesn't tackle that issue, and it has started to, a little bit late in the day perhaps, but it has started to, then some of those critics might be right. But they will evolve, I'm no doubt, and that's happening and has been happening over the last 2 or 3 years at quite a rate. So in terms of you guys, right, you're going to step into a newsroom, and you know, I tell you what, the great thing about being a trainee reporter or trainee journalist at the moment, more so than ever before, is you can make a contribution from day one in every newsroom that you walk into. Again, if you go back in time, you would go in as a trainee and there'd be a bank of reporters, a news desk, a team of subs that had been there for the best part of 400 years, and a deputy editor and editor, you know, to get your voice heard in those newsrooms, and I was in that newsroom, is difficult and it takes time. That has changed. It's a flatter structure, and if you're an editor with any kind of intelligence, or a news desk with any kind of intelligence, you're going to be listening to the people that you're bringing in that are probably your age, with your experiences, with your understanding of what might drive people that you knock around with to access your material or our material online or in print. So I think if you're going to go with anything else today, it's whether it be an interview or in the newsroom itself, you know, get stuck in from the very start, and I think your voice will be heard a lot more than it's ever been before. If ever there was a description of multitasking, it would be the modern newspaper reporter or journalist, because I tell you what, it's not going in and writing 300 words lead anymore. You have got to be on the ball with so many different things. We'll come to a bit of differentiation between print and digital shortly, but you know, you've got to be able to demonstrate at interview and from word go that you are comfortable with writing for print, writing for digital, writing for Facebook, writing for Twitter, 2 different things. You've got to have an understanding of what's coming next, because no doubt there will be something, and it's probably already being used. And in 12 months' time, it could be an industry-changing event. You've got to have the ability to be able to take a quick photo if you need to. You've definitely got to have the ability to take some video footage. You've got to be able to go back and edit some of that video footage and get it online. Within Johnston Press, where we don't have what you term as pure sub-editors anymore, you need not only to be able to write copy, but you need to be able to write headlines. You need to understand an editorial system, i.e. computer system, that is not simple and straightforward. So you've got to be able to harness all these things. You've got to be able to tackle all these different variety of things on any given working day. So I would say that some of the challenges that you face are probably greater than they have been before, but there is still one common factor that marries all these things together, maybe apart from the editorial system, but other than that, it's still fundamentally about good journalism. And that's what binds all these things together. Because as I think happens in courses like this, they develop into not just print journalism courses, but multimedia. And you know, it's all being accessed by different people, but it's all one audience in effect. You know, it's all people consuming our stories, it's consuming our information, and we're just using different channels to get there. And that's the key thing that's changed. So I think, you know, it's by no means a bad thing to be great at certain aspects of those things or have specific interests in some of those things. But with newsrooms having shrunk somewhat over the last 5 years, obviously editors are on the lookout for those people that can deliver all of those things if possible, rather than just some of them. But the fundamentals still remain the same, and I think there are maybe some things that this course does very well, actually, that you need to take on board, I think, and absorb and demonstrate when it comes to interview and in that job that maybe other courses don't necessarily do. And by that I mean the real practicalities of reporting. And again, it's back to basics. It's about finding stories and telling them. Because that's what journalism is at the end of the day. It's finding what is a story and telling that story. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're doing it in, let's see, I'll show my age here, 144 characters, 142, something like that, isn't it? Whether it's in that number of characters or in 300 words or a double-page feature or a supplement or a special edition or a campaign over a period of days and weeks and months, you're telling stories. And I would probably expect that the majority of you are sat here today because you're quite excited, because you want to tell stories and you want to write and you want to let people hear what you have to say. That's certainly why I got into it, I have to say. And that still exists. So, in terms of that side of things, you're telling stories. So you're telling stories on Twitter, on Facebook, in the paper, by a video, even by a photo can tell a story. If you're doing sports journalism, you're still trying to translate, whether it be a match report or a match preview or an interview with a player or a manager, you're trying to deliver the information to people, and you're also probably, what's as important these days as well, telling the story that maybe people don't already know. And this is where you've got two layers of journalism. You've got the on-diary and off-diary. Your on-diary stuff in terms of telling people probably what's already out there, but the off-diary in terms of giving them more knowledge, more depth, more understanding of what's behind that story. And that's what this course does well, because you are expected to go out and patch. You are expected to go out and talk to real human beings and ask them questions. Heavens above that a reporter should ever do that rather than sit behind a monitor or a phone and deal with people that way. Because I guarantee it, if you want to be an outstanding journalist, it's how you deal with people face to face that will put you the cut above the rest. Because with the best will in the world, as long as you're reasonably media savvy, anybody could tweet, anybody can Facebook, and I'd expect even my rawest recruit to be able to write a 3-par story about a road traffic accident to go on the website. That's the kind of thing that you should learn here. When you come to me, you should be ready to do that. Where I then hopefully take you, or my staff then take you, is to being hopefully an outstanding reporter, because you've got the drive, the initiative, and the basics to go out, find the stories that nobody else knows about, that maybe people don't want to tell you, and they don't want publicised, and then translate them into print or online or whatever medium we choose. So as you can see, it's still a pretty exciting job. I mean, there's a lot of doom and gloom around the industry. There are no jobs out there. It's smaller newsrooms. It's all a nightmare. But actually, fundamentally, you tell me another job where you can go out and every day or every week you don't really know what you're doing until you walk into the office that day. Very little is planned for you. You'll have some jobs, some things that you have to do as part of a weekly or a daily cycle of news and populating the paper. But actually, you don't really know whether or not that day you're going to go and interview a council leader or a councillor. Hopefully you don't get too many of those days because they're deathly boring. Or you're going to go and interview literally Joe Bloggs down the road whose house is caved in, or you're going to have to knock on the door of a family whose son or daughter has recently died. The whole number of challenging things, but I'll tell you what, it's never dull, it's never boring. And you look back on your days and weeks as a trainee reporter, and I know I did, thinking that you've faced some pretty interesting challenges. And again, you need to be ready for that. So as much as, to some degree, it can be a job that you sit behind your desk and type and write, a lot of it's also getting out and about and seeing people and meeting people and talking to people and going in with plan A and coming out with plan C in terms of a story, and be able to react to what people tell you at any given time. And that goes back to the whole element of change, is being flexible. And in this sort of multimedia environment, that's really, really important. So you need to understand that. And I think also, you know, I'm not saying that you have to be the toughest human being on earth to be a trainee reporter. But equally, if you are a little fragile, it's probably an important time to start thinking about toughening up as well. Because there are some occasions where you're going to come into situations that are uncomfortable. You're talking to people that don't want to talk to you. You're doing stories that people aren't going to be happy about. You might be going to court, for example. A lot of people expect a reporter or a journalist to be in court and then expect that story to appear in the paper, but others don't. And others aren't going to like that. And of course, these days, there are different platforms for them to express that as well. So more than ever, I think you need to have at least a layer of veneer on your skin, if nothing else. Okay. So let's, God, what's people saying? I'm just checking my, just looking for Lisa Bradley's name on here for anything defamatory. Well, we'll see, we'll see. Okay. All right, so you're going into an interview for a job, okay? Because that's an environment that a lot of you are going to be in, hopefully, in the not too distant future. What can I tell you about getting a job? Because I guess ultimately that's the end game from this course. Right, first of all, okay, one of the key elements is, are there jobs out there? The answer is yes. Have I recruited recently? The answer is yes. Have I recruited from here recently? The answer is most definitely yes. Leaving aside Lisa's involvement in that, most editors will have links with colleges, and most editors at the moment, especially when they get a chance to recruit, want to do that recruitment as quickly as possible for fear of not being able to recruit a few days later. So how many of these jobs are actually advertised on Hold the Front Page or on other platforms? I would say increasingly fewer and fewer. And therefore, there's two elements here, isn't there, to getting a job. There's those that you can apply for because they're advertised, and those that you can get before they're advertised. And again, something obviously that's done well here is the work experience side of things and the placements. And we'll come back to that in terms of how you get to the front of the queue in terms of getting those jobs. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that you are going to go for one that's advertised or you're in an interview situation. First of all, your application. If it's advertised, I guarantee you that if I was advertising a job on one of my titles, I'll probably get in the region of 50 applications, I would have thought, minimum. Of which 80% of those people will say they either have completed or are almost certainly going to get their 100 words a minute shorthand in the very near future, but have certainly got most of their NCTJs or are on the cusp of doing so. Most will have done a bit of work experience somewhere. Most will say that they will work for me 7 hours a day. Sorry, 7 hours a day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That's what they actually do. And will live and breathe working for the Batley and Birstall News or whichever title it is that they're applying for. Having cunningly copied and pasted my name over the top of the previous application's name that they'd already done. So what's gonna put yours at the top of the pack? How are you going to get an interview without having met that editor at the moment? Okay, so two words of advice from me. The first is more sort of, I don't know, straightforward, I guess, and the other one less so. The more straightforward is really, what's going to set your application apart from others? And it's not necessarily great cuttings, because to be honest with you, have I got time to read through loads and loads of cuttings from 50 applicants? Probably not, if I'm just going to be brutally honest. Is it going to be that, like I say, you say you're the greatest thing ever? Probably not, because you're all saying that anyway. So what's going to put yours to the top of the pack? First of all, is if your covering letter has got some understanding of the area that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a job on the Wakefield Express, I'd expect your covering letter to be at least half about Wakefield and about the fact that you know it, or that you know the patch, that you've been to the patch, that you've seen the paper, not just gone online on the website to have a quick look at what stories we're doing. You know what campaigns we've been running. You understand a little bit about the heritage of the place, about the environment that you're going to be working in, even if you're from Devon or Cornwall or somewhere like that, especially if you're from somewhere like that. The other more straightforward thing that really, really makes a big difference is, rather than at the end of the CV or the letter saying either references supplied upon request, which always does my nut in. Why bother putting that? I mean, may as well just not put anything. I mean, at the very least, put an actual name and phone number as a referee. Preferably if somebody that actually works on a newspaper that I can phone up and I can say, Mr. X, Mrs. Y, she's applied for a job with me, what they like. And I could do that in 2 minutes. And hopefully it'll be somebody I know, even better, respect their opinion. And if they say, yeah, they're good, then I'll get you in for an interview. Even if you can't do that, can you get something written up by somebody that's you've been on work experience? Can you get them to do a quick 3 or 4 pages just saying the kind of things that you covered and whether you were reasonably good? Because they're the kind of things that, I just think show initiative at the end of the day, and that's what reporting's all about. And that's what, again, going back to what sets you apart from other people. The second thing, a bit less straightforward, is, get creative in terms of your applicant, especially these days. I've never had a video application for a job, but hey, why not? I'd certainly look at it, certainly be interesting. It's stuff like that. What's that editor gonna look at and think, hey, hang on, they've taken some effort here. This is a person that really wants to come and work for my newspaper, my website. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so that's the applications. Even better if you can shortcut that, isn't it? And just get the job without having to go through that process. So have an understanding of where you want to work. That's pretty important. And try and get your placement sorted out on that paper, or somewhere close to that paper, or within that stable of papers, or within that operating company. Because at the end of the day, if you go in, do a couple of weeks, do a good job, and maybe go back again if you can for another week or two, impress, do some good stuff, and at the end of it, go up to news desk and say, look, I know there might not be a job here for a week, 2 weeks, a year, but when it comes up, I really, really want to work here. Please give me a call. That's how you're going to get an interview without having to apply for a job at the end of the day. And I've had, in the recent past, several instances where actually it's not even got down to that somebody has done such a good job in terms of, in effect, doing placement work for us, that we've just brought them in. because we know the person, we know that they can operate to a certain level, and we can get moving. So if you want to play the percentages, it's important to start thinking about those kind of things. Okay, so go back to when you actually get the job. We've touched on some of the things that you're going to get and expect, I think, of being a reporter or being in a newsroom. Crystal ball time. So how are things going to change over the next 12 months? Well, we've just relaunched all our titles across West Yorkshire in print, and we're going to be relaunching all our websites in the near future. So a lot of change taking place there. We're relocating our Wakefield office at the moment, still in Wakefield City Centre, but that takes place next week. And so there's a lot of structural change. We're always looking at the way we're structured, the best working practices to fit in with what we need to deliver. So, like I said at the start, you're going to come into an environment that's full of change. That you need to be prepared for that. I think in terms of the next 12 months, the big changes are certainly going to be on the digital side, and I think that's really, some newspaper titles really harnessing some of the social media aspects of what they do, even better than they're doing now. But also, I think it's important to spend just a few minutes as well on print, because fundamentally, the workload, if you like, of what our reporters do at the moment is still geared heavily towards print. It's flattening, and I'm saying it's getting closer and closer to 50-50, but at the moment, I would suggest that we're probably still somewhere in the region of 70-30 to print. So the bottom line is, you're going to need to be producing for print products at the moment first and foremost. I think that will change over the next 12 and 24 months. But print's really important still, and not everybody's online. It's staggering to think that, isn't it? But there are many demographics that don't necessarily have internet access, or some that do but don't have broadband and therefore can't watch the videos that you might place online. Even if they could, whether they would want to is open to question. So there's this constant balance at the moment in the industry between existing readers and keeping them, and people that don't read what we do and attracting them. If you focus on one and ignore the other, it's actually relatively easy to do. But trying to do both at the same time is not so easy, because nuts and bolts time, what one of those demographics wants, the other really doesn't, and vice versa, to a degree. So amongst all the social media stuff, all the exciting projects, all the new initiatives that are going to be taking place, also, I need my reporters to be thinking about who they're writing for print, primarily, I guess. And that demographic is still very much an older readership. We're talking, the majority of our readers are 45 plus. They're people that have families or have had families at home. A lot of them are even older than that. People that probably buy newspapers, if I'm going to be honest, as much out of habit as they do anything else, because that's the only way that they know how to get the information that they need at a local level. So it's important, that fact, and it's important to remember who you're writing for when you write material. So maybe some of the language and the terminology that you might use on Facebook, on Twitter, even online. Is that really suitable to go into a local weekly newspaper? Or is actually the style of writing, the language you need to use, does it need to be geared towards, in effect, a different generation to the one that you're in? Or not, as the case may be. And I think we forget that at our peril, because as much as we want to chase new readers, and it's important that we do, equally we don't want to alienate our existing readers. And actually there's a lot of people within that age demographic that still don't access our newspapers, and I still think there's opportunity to get them to come and buy what we do. And the topics of what we write about, again, might be different in appeal to different age groups. So whereas with the best will in the world, you as individuals might be bored to tears if you had to write a council report about road planning, or, crikey, trying to think of anything, what else would be bad? Well, there's a whole range of things to choose from, I guess. Usually council, but you might find deathly dull. But actually, it's not about you, is it? It's not really about what you find interesting. It's about what your readers find interesting. That's what you need to focus on. You always need to put yourself in the mind of your readers. Okay, so what you might find boring, they might find not just interesting, but essential to how they live their lives, to what they need to know. So across the spectrum, and I think this is a really important point to make if it's not been made already, and to be honest, it may well have been, so forgive me. But as we stand at the moment, when everybody says journalism is dead, dying, whatever, two really important points. The first one is, this week, the Wakefield Express, the stories that my staff have written or are writing will be read by more people than ever in the history of journalism. Because even at the peak of the Wakefield Express as a print-only product, that circulation was, well, not saying nowhere near, but certainly below the combined amount of people that buy the paper and read our stories on the website and access some more information via our Facebook site as well. So ultimately, we're going out, more people are reading and consuming our material than ever before. And that goes to show that there's still the thirst for local information, for local news, more so than ever, I guess. The difficulty is monetizing some of that opportunity online. And no doubt that's been mentioned before and will be mentioned by other people far more savvy commercially than me. The second important aspect as well is that, and I've had so many examples of this, and I might try and remember one off the top of my head as I'm talking, but you know, Facebook and Twitter, you know, they are great tools for reporters, they really are. But they're no substitute for properly curated information. And you know, there's been so many examples where information that's been placed on Twitter and Facebook is just simply wrong. And you know, you'll see that in the news at the moment in terms of Twitter. You know, prosecution is now taking place in terms of defamation. But even at a far more minor level than that on Facebook, yeah, it's just incredible because everybody's got a platform now. And I think it's great that they do, but as a journalist, you've got to be very careful about what you actually... It's not about believing or not believing, but it's about corroborating, isn't it? It's about being professional, I suppose, at the end of the day. And that leads me back to my point, which is that while Facebook and Twitter are great tools, if you like, for journalists, and are great conduits for information and for starting places, I guess, for information and stories, I see them as much as headlines rather than actual stories at the end of the day. And I still firmly believe that you still need a group of professional people to curate that information and decide what is fact, what isn't fact, what is well, what is legal and what isn't legal as well. And that's always been the same. That's always been the same for all reporters. You're just getting the information in maybe slightly different ways in this day and age, rather than necessarily, pounding the streets and knocking on doors as much as 10, 15 years ago. I feel like I'm blathering on a bit. Is this all making sense to everybody? Is this useful? Yeah. Good. See how long I've got left. Right, 18 minutes left. So I'll sort of sum up now, I think, and then give plenty of time for questions, because at the end of the day, I need to know, I'm here, I've got a little bit of time left, and I'll answer your questions as honestly and as succinctly as I can. Okay, so summary time. Okay, a bit of an echo, but it is. I'll tell you what, it's flipping fantastic job being a reporter. I mean, I used to, when I was a weekly reporter, and when you look back at old jobs, and this may be your first job perhaps, or maybe not, the one that you're about to go into, you always look back at old jobs and you always remember the good bits and forget about the bad bits. And believe me, there were some bad bits about being a trainee reporter. I remember being told by a news desk, you have to write 5 nibs a day, or you've got to do X, Y, and Z, which are just terminally dull things to have to do. But equally, you get out and about, and you can just get into some great situations, speak to some brilliant people. The old adage is absolutely true. Every single person has got a story inside them. Everybody. They probably don't know it, but they have. And if you can get somebody talking for a period of time, you will get a story. Just try it. It's a great thing to try and do. Might be a useful exercise, I don't know, in terms of the course, but just speak to somebody that doesn't think they've got a story and try and get a story out of them. And you can, because they do have something to tell. Might not be hard news, but I bet there's a feature there somewhere. I remember in London going to an armed robbery, a place called Hillingdon in West London, and there was a police cordon round where the armed robbery took place, and I was sort of knocking around there with some TV crews and 1 or 2 other media outlets, but we were the sort of the local paper, if you like, and I recognised somebody on the street. And I said, "Oh, do you know what's been going on?" And they said, "Oh, I don't, but just go next door, because I think whatever her name, Mabel or Ethel, or that's a bit stereotypical, isn't it? Charlene or whoever. She'll know. Just go in." So I went in, and she goes, "Oh yeah, come in, I'll tell you all about it." And I went into this front room, and it was a typical sort of back-to-back terrace type house. No frills, to put it mildly. And she sat me down on the sofa and she said, "Oh well, yeah, it all kicked off, and all these police came, and I think they robbed the post office down the road." And she started saying, "Yeah, and there was 3 or 4 of them actually," and started giving me descriptions. I thought, it was quite dark at the time. It was sort of early evening. I thought, how does she know this? I said, well, how can you give me sort of this kind of information? I thought, well, I can't bloody print it anyway, but unless the police corroborate it. And she said, "Oh, no, because they came into my house." I said, "What do you mean, they came into your house?" She said, yeah, they came into my house. I said, "Well, where are they now?" I said, "Oh, they've gone down the tunnel." I said, "They did what?" Anyway, so it turns out she decided to tell me that she's got a tunnel in the kitchen that their old man uses occasionally to get out of the estate unseen at night. So I was sat there thinking, oh shit, okay, don't know if I need to be hearing all this. So I started thinking, right, well, so I make my excuses and depart. And I just got up and her husband came home, and he was a big lad, I tell you, 6'3", and he just looked at me. I'm not the biggest, and he just sort of said, "Who is he, and what are you telling him?" And I just went, Rebecca, gotta go now, blah, blah, blah. I just scuttled out of there as quickly as, and that's a fairly extreme example, I suppose, but you're guaranteed to get into some interesting positions. You'll have some interesting stories to tell. Like I say, it can be really, really good fun. And I think as I saw on the tweets and on some of the live blogging that took place, you know, a lot of your, like I say, more glamorous speakers this week would have told you that, you know, being on a local paper is a really good place to start, and I would thoroughly endorse that. Right, so questions from anybody. Who's got anything they'd like to ask me?
Did you find it difficult to get a job in London?
A job in London? Do you know what? I took the approach when I came out of my course. I did a 6-month fast track at, as it was, Stradbroke, and as is now Norton College at Sheffield. Maybe I was lucky, I don't know, but I just took the approach that I was going to move anywhere where there was a job, and that job got advertised. I went for it, but I did some of the things that I've told you about. So when I went for that interview, I made sure that I'd been to the place the weekend before. What else did I do before that job? I remember it quite well, actually. Do you know what I did? I actually went and found a story the weekend before. So I went on patch and I did a 150-word story. And I took that into the interview with me. God, I bet it was crap as well. Jesus Christ. But it obviously worked. So no, I mean, London, well, whatever. It's just a local paper at the end of the day. You know, it doesn't really matter if it's in London or Scotland or wherever. It's irrelevant. It's a paper serving a local community. You know, if it was a job at the Telegraph or something like that, then clearly it might have been a different matter. But then again, it's all about if you're lucky enough, or if that's the way you want to go. Again, you just got to consider what audience are they writing for, and how you approach the interview. You know, depending on what they think that they want from you. So. Yeah.
Well, I can't. My Wi-Fi has gone down, so I can't find the exact article. There's something on Press Gazette today. It says a former editor, but I can't get back onto it to see. It says that regional papers are sort of making themselves so irrelevant now to their readership that they're just killing themselves by moving out of town. What are your thoughts on that? How does local journalism keep itself relevant, build itself a future?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said about knowing your audience. So I think you need to understand that as best you can, and I think it is easier for some titles than it is others. So to take Leeds as an example, I think it's fair to say, I don't think Peter Charlton would kill me for saying this, that it's substantially easier for the Yorkshire Post to know its target audience than the Yorkshire Evening Post. And I think that is pretty similar story for a lot of the metropolitan dailies. In terms of relevance, you know, I think in terms of geographical relevance, you know, I'm not going to stand here and tell you otherwise. We've restructured, which has meant that we've had to move out of certain micro-local areas, if you like, where we've had offices, because we've had no option commercially other than to do that. The effect, in some instances, we had some negative kickback from that. In others, we didn't. The negative ones that I remember the most are the ones that took place furthest to go. So I do think it's changing a little bit, because I don't think now that people necessarily think it's an essential part of any commercial operation, let's call it a commercial operation for the sake of this, to have a presence on a high street. Because, you know, you look at HMV, you look at Comet, you look at a lot of other places, and Woolworths, whatever. And I think people understand a bit better now the fact that, you know, it may not be commercial sense to have that kind of presence anymore. So I think they're a little bit more forgiving. And I think I just, you know, go back to what I said in terms of maintaining and growing and building your primary audience and then trying to attract a new secondary audience, it is really difficult to do. It's to try and be something for everybody. It is really tough. And I think that's where there's a lot of divergence. There's a lot of people trying to do that, and then there's a lot of people just aiming on what they see their primary audience being and trying to maintain and build that. And I think the jury's still out in terms of which is a better way to do it, and maybe even one's better for the short term and not so good for the long term. I think I was doing some research for a strategy meeting that we had this morning actually, and I was looking for, it's more of a commercial thing, but I came across a quote from somebody in American newspapers that said, "Newspapers aren't dying, it's just that our readers are." So that might put it into a little bit of perspective there, that you do need to sort of bring new readers through. But then there's also an argument to say that that might happen to some degree naturally anyway, as people get older, as they start families, as they get a little bit more rooted to a certain community, then they're more likely to buy those papers. But it has changed a bit. Use Wakefield as an example, even in the real Wakefield heartlands, if you like. And Wakefield, for those that don't know it, is a pretty community-driven place. Even in those areas, the days of people not really travelling outside Wakefield for anything have gone. People move around for work, for relationships. There's so many things now, and actually, the old names and faces adage. It is still true, but less so than it used to be, because fewer and fewer people recognise other people, and that's just modern society. So.
Yeah, I just have a question about kind of monetising local news going forward. I mean, the traditional classifieds dealt with by eBay now. There's dating sites now, there's job sites. All the estate agents are online. I mean, where do you see kind of money coming from for these papers going forward?
Newspaper sales, actually, is one big thing. And the balance has shifted. So I think if you look back, these are very rough and ready figures, so don't quote me on these, but roughly 80% of newspapers' income was advertising based, to 20% other, which is newspaper sales and other additional things. I would think that's probably shifted to 70-30 at least. And I suspect will flatten a little bit more. I think it will always be still the primary route, but I think you're going to have, there's a lot more emphasis on subscription to try and lock in people to sale, if you like, rather than just relying on them day in, day out, or week in, week out, buying the paper. Just to sort of deviate slightly, what's interesting is that a lot of those platforms that you quote, so jobs, property, motors to a slightly lesser degree, those sort of things were really big drivers of sale. So people don't just buy newspapers for news. People would buy papers because they wanted to get a job. People would buy papers because they want to buy a house or sell a house. And if that content, or if there's less of that content there, or if our content's less relevant, which, if I'm going to be blunt, certainly in terms of jobs it is, then that's a chunk of readership gone. And so in terms of the newspaper sales decline, if you like, I think that has contributed to it much more than people not wanting news, and even possibly more than not wanting news in a newspaper format. I suppose in terms of the monetising aspect, yeah, we've got to get creative. We've got to be relevant in that marketplace as well. So we've got to price ourselves correctly. We've got to be competitive. We've got to make sure that we deliver results. And I think if we're going to be honest, whether it be editorial or commercial, and this is probably going back 5 years plus, it was, not easy street, but you know, circulations would go up fairly naturally, revenues would increase fairly naturally. It's a lot tougher now. You know, you've really got to work on it. You've got to make sure that you deliver for your customer a response. Now, the great thing about that is that makes the journalist even more valuable than they used to be, because at the end of the day, if you need to show value, then you've got to demonstrate that people are buying the paper or logging on to the material online. And you're never going to do that unless you have good journalists writing good news stories, because that's what people are buying the paper for, leaving aside those particular platforms. You know, they're not really buying it for the adverts.
So what do you think of things like the free paper business model then, like the Metro or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, all these things have got their place, and I think that but you need some variety in the marketplace. So I think that, you know, not everybody can do a Metro, because Metro are already there to some degree, and actually we've got a tie-in with them. But you've got to be competitive, but you've got to maintain your own place in the marketplace, I think, and be strong in that area. But we've had daily papers turn to weekly papers, of which one of my titles, Halifax Courier, was one of them. Jury's still out as to whether that's a way forward for others, I think. There's been experiments with paywalls on websites. Jury's still out with that, I think. There are apps out there for local newspapers or for regional newspapers. Jury's still out with that. So we're in a quite an interesting situation, I think. There's a lot of unknowns. Yeah.
You mentioned competition.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on things like hyperlocal websites, citizen journalism, bloggers, that kind of thing? They can kind of do your work and they've demonstrated they are popular. And crucially, they don't really need a kind of commercial background like regional press. So where do you stand on that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, to some degree, that it's nothing new. We've been running the equivalent of that in our papers for the last 11, 12 years. Our community columns, which are written by local people, they do it voluntarily. It's 3 pages of every week's Wakefield Express. All it is literally columns of information from people at micro-local level about car boot sales, maybe some stories from the post office, so, you know, some facts and bits and pieces and some little bits of opinion and a bit of fun. So to some degree, we've already we've been doing that for some time. But yeah, I think it's clearly got a place at the moment, because, like you say, there are sites out there that are definitely very popular. I think, again, would I see them as competition as such? I'm not sure whether or not they're competition or not. Whether or not, in effect, they're just part of the landscape and we live alongside each other, in effect. I think that's probably where we're at the moment. Whether that'll change at some point, I don't know, and possibly so, maybe. I guess new setups and new startups, especially, I guess, bloggers or community citizen journalism, if you like, they will always have the advantage to a degree of being completely new. And in a media world, often that's quite a good fillip to have. We've got the advantage of our brands and the loyalty and the integrity that they reflect, hopefully. But sometimes that can weigh you down in new media a little bit. You know, people get confused about, are you a paper or are you a website or are you a social media entity? I think we've got to be quite clear that we are all of these things moving forward. Just reminding me, sorry, I'm probably over time already. Apologies if I am. It's an interesting just word that I used, integrity. And that's really important off the back of Leveson and everything that's happened over the last 12 months. The other thing that I wanted to say today is that where newspapers in particular are going to continue to thrive, or the newspapers that will continue to thrive, are those that continue to have the trust and respect of their readers. And it's very, very important that, because although the majority of people do understand the difference between some of the things that took place off the back of the Leveson report. Clearly in the Leveson report, he made a particular reference to regional papers and saying that they were out of the scope of the report and that a lot of the findings didn't apply to regional newspapers because they conduct themselves in a very different way. But some people, and increasingly more people, are blurring the lines between the two, and it's really important, I think, that, you know, as the new breed of journalists coming through, that don't. It's really easy to run with stuff that's out there that isn't. You can't stand up 100%. That turns out to be wrong. That you think, I'm sure it was right because he three tweets. There was something on Facebook about it, and you know somebody else said it, and but it turns out to be wrong. And as soon as you get stuff wrong, I mean, we all make mistakes, but as soon as you consistently let people down and get things wrong, you lose their trust and respect. Our massive advantage over everybody else is our brand, and that's all about trust, and that's a really big priority for us. Getting stuff right. It's really. We've gone back to basics a little bit in our group over the last 3 months. It's all about the basics again. It's getting names spelt. This is going to be boring, but it's so important. Spell names right. Spell street names right. You know, get the geography right of the story that you're writing about. You know, it's things like that. If you get those wrong, people are just going to think, well, what's the point? I may as well just go online to get my information, because if they can't spell that person's name right, or if they can't spell that town right, well, what's the point of reading the rest of it? I don't trust it anymore. And if we're going to continue, it's why the Yorkshire Post does so well, because it really has a trust and respect of its readers. Whether you like the Yorkshire Post or not, it is definitely the case. So it's a really important thing. Sorry, oh, you've had one. You've had one. Greedy.
Mark, tomorrow we've got a session with the guys who are going to be running the new City TV license.
Oh, yeah.
Which is obviously a commercial operation rather than just a community operation. And although this is Leeds, it's conceivable in the not too distant future there could be a license for a local operation in Wakefield, so you become even more local. How do you regard that? Is it competition? Is it healthy competition? Is it worrying?
Well, I think they've already. I might be wrong, but I think they've set out in their scope the new Leeds TV franchise winners, that they'll include Wakefield, Huddersfield, Bradford. You know, so I think they're looking quite regional, not just Leeds. I'm sure they'll correct me if I'm wrong on Twitter or something, but. You know, I'm no expert in TV, whether it be the commercial side of the operation or the editorial side of the operation, if you like. I think, I mean, fair play to them if they do a fantastic job. I think it's going to be tough. If I'm sure I'm not saying anything that they don't know already, because, you know, they've got to make a local TV offering attractive to viewers. And I'm not saying that they won't, but clearly Manchester tried and failed, and I think there were maybe other reasons for that, but it's not as though this is a new thing. So as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I mean, if it turns out to be competition, then all well and good, on we go. There's plenty of it out there. I think they'll just need to find their feet first of all. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I mean, great. If it's more competition, then fine. You know, it's like I say, it's something that we're not short of, whether it be in specific marketplaces. I've got, you know, titles in areas that have print competition up against them. And obviously everywhere we're up against, you know, these days we compete with the BBC at the end of the day in terms of website. So, yeah, don't know. Be an interesting journey for them. So one more, go on.
I don't think this necessarily applies like the Yorkshire Post because it's such a wide audience, but the local paper in Middlesbrough,
Right.
like personally, I think like the quality of it is really bad, and it's got worse and worse, and it's a lot of like crime stories, just like day in day out police-fed stories. And I think a lot of people don't buy that anymore. I think because the quality seems so bad, and is that because of like budget cuts for local papers like that? Are we going to see those disappearing, or is that just, I don't know, bad journalism from one thing? But you know, these like much smaller newspapers.
I don't know the Middlesbrough title that well, but thank you for not choosing a Johnston Press title. Will you, Chris? Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think, I don't know about title very well, but I doubt whether it is a small title or not, I don't know. I suspect not. I suspect it doesn't think itself as a small title. Others might think it a small title in the scope of things now. I think there's it's sometimes I think there's a big difference between certain titles in terms of their qualities, and I think a lot also there's a big difference between dailies and weeklies. Is Middlesbrough a daily? I presume it still is, probably. Yeah, I would think so. So again, I don't think I'm sort of revealing any industry secrets to say that a lot of the daily titles have probably, it's more noticeable that they're a bit thinner, perhaps, and perhaps obviously not titles in Johnston Press, but maybe some other groups. I don't know. I'm going to get myself in trouble there. No, but some, you know, it's maybe more noticeable on a daily basis if they're a bit thinner, rather than the weekly packages, which is still quite bulky, quite strong. So I think there's that aspect. I think the other aspect is you probably, again, I don't want to do any disservice to Middlesbrough, but I suspect there's quite a lot of crime to write about. Yeah, I'm guessing. I'm not saying there isn't elsewhere, but, you know, I guess that I'm not saying that's easy copy, but it's on diary stuff that's there. It obviously needs to be reported, but it's probably more straightforward, I guess, to turn that kind of material around than it is maybe taking time and resource out to do investigative features or other things. And there's always been a big debate about, you know, what sells newspapers and what people want to read. Is it hard news? Is it depressing news? Is it more in-depth news? Is it more serious news? Tricky to know, really. I mean, there's been experiments. I think there was one down in Brighton a little while ago where they decided we're going to get rid of bad news. We're just going to report good news. And then they reported their sales figures, and that wasn't very good news. I can tell you that much. So you can't get away from it. And I'm always, I still now, I had a conversation with somebody that came into my office recently we were debating this point about good news and bad news appearing in the paper. And I said, look, you know, Middlesbrough, I don't know about that example, but if you look at the Wakefield Express, it's the one I know best. Actually, we work very hard to try and keep quite a good variance in terms of our front pages, so that if we feel that we've had 2 or 3 weeks of doom and gloom, we try and lighten it in some way. But a lot of the time, you know, I've done good news stories on front pages and they don't sell. even though people like to think that they do, they don't. And it sounds like a sort of hard-hearted thing to say, but I know if something serious happens on my patch, you know, in terms of it probably involving loss of life or something that's quite high profile, if you like, I know that's going to sell papers on the front pages, as opposed to the more upbeat stuff. But if you to look at the paper as a whole, so not just focusing on what's on the front page, but as a whole product, actually, I also guarantee you that there's probably more good news / neutral news in the paper than there is bad news. But people always see the bad news because actually that's what they actually want to read more of, to be honest with you. And that's human nature. And, you know, that's another debate that could take another hour. I suspect there are lots of people that disagree with me. But my personal belief is that is human nature. And I think we need to get a balance right, and it can't be too depressing. You don't want to sort of be you don't want to be reading the Wakefield Express every week and just, you know, want to go and sit down in a dark room for another hour. But equally, you can't avoid it. So it's balance, I suspect. And I think, sorry, just keep going a little bit. I think newspapers work in, I mean, to be fair, I'm not that old, but I do think that the way newspapers operate work in cycles. So I do think that we've started into and are within a period which is a lot less tabloid. And I think that's partly due to what happened with Leveson Report and the News of the World closing down. And I think there has been, where the reaction has been, is that I tend to get more complaints if we over tabloidize things now than previously, because I think people don't want to feel like they're aligning themselves with that. It's a lot more good and bad now in terms of media, I think, than it has been before. And you know, don't get me wrong, the tabloids still far outsell, you know, the quality compacts and broadsheets, but I do think that's a shift, and I think in our relaunch we certainly tried to mirror that shift in terms of maybe taking a little less in-your-face approach with some of the headlines and some of the designs, trying a more of a quality feel rather than a sort of shouty feel. Hope that helps.
Talking of shouty feels, you need to see the latest tweet.
Yeah. Don't worry, sure. There'll be plenty of defamatory words later. But